Please be seated.
Yang Mulia
His Majesty, UN Secretary General António Guterres, His Majesty, ASEAN leaders. The preamble of ASEAN and the UN Charter both begin with "We, the peoples." This means our people must always be the top priority. And amidst current global challenges that are complex, wars and conflicts, crisis in energy, food crisis, financial crisis, and natural disasters, our people are deeply impacted. And to address this requires coordinated international efforts, both at the global level, which is coordinated by the United Nations, and in the Indo-Pacific region, which is coordinated by ASEAN. However, we must be honest, the effectiveness of ASEAN and the UN is often hindered by unconducive geopolitical dynamics, which fades the spirit of cooperation and the spirit of multilateralism, and is replaced by the rule of the strong. ASEAN and the UN have clear choices to be consistent in respecting international law as a basis for cooperation between nations and an inclusive paradigm of collaboration. Together, let us promote a fair development agenda for developing countries, including the right to progress and prosper. Global governance reforms must continue to be our priority to remain fit for purpose and fit for its time. Let us strengthen the spirit of international cooperation between UN and ASEAN for the people of the world. Thank you. With this, I declare the 13th ASEAN United Nations Summit open.
selanjutnya
Next, I invite His Excellency Secretary General of the UN, António Guterres, to deliver his opening speech. Your Excellency, you may have the floor.
Your Majesty, Excellencies, Mr. Chair, President Joko Widodo, thank you for your warm welcome. And allow me to express my enormous appreciation for the wisdom and effectiveness in which you have not only leading ASEAN, but I remember the G20 last year with a fantastic contribution to improve international relations in our unfortunately divided world. Congratulations, Mr. President. And allow me also to welcome Prime Minister Xanana Guzmão with the presence of Timor-Leste for the first time as observer in ASEAN. Your Majesty, Excellencies, the ASEAN-UN Comprehensive Partnership is more important than ever. We face tests as far as the eye can see, from the climate emergency to a global cost of living crisis, to raging conflicts, to growing poverty, hunger, and inequalities. And all these challenges are aggravated by rising geopolitical tensions. there is a real risk of fragmentation, of a great fracture in world economic and financial systems, with diverging strategies on technology and artificial intelligence and conflicting security frameworks. And I commend ASEAN for your vital role in building bridges of understanding all over the world. ASEAN has played an extremely important role as a center that convenes all those that unfortunately represent the most dramatic divisions in today's world. And this series of summits is a demonstration of that fundamental convening role of ASEAN. And we need it in a world that is increasingly multipolar, but requires strong multilateral institutions to go with it, based on equity, solidarity, and universality. Your Majesty, Excellencies, I'm grateful for your steadfast support for multilateral solutions and your contribution of over 5,000 peacekeepers from ASEAN countries. Today, allow me to focus on three critical areas. First, advancing peace through diplomacy. ASEAN's convening power, commitment to dialogue, and experience in conflict prevention are crucial pillars of stability. Today, tensions remain high, from the Korean Peninsula to the South China Sea. I'm grateful to ASEAN member states for your pursuit of dialogue and peaceful dispute resolution rooted in the respect for international law, including the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Your Majesty, Excellencies, since we gathered last year, the situation in Myanmar has further deteriorated. Brutal violence, worsening poverty, and systematic repression are crushing hopes for a return to democracy. The conflict is exacerbating existing inequalities and vulnerabilities faced by women and girls, including sexual violence, forced marriage, and human trafficking. More and more people are crossing borders in desperate search for safety and protection, and the situation is untenable. Over 1 million Rohingya remain in Bangladesh, in the world's largest refugee camp, and regrettably, the conditions for their safe, voluntary, and dignified return are not yet in sight. Much more is needed. I fully appreciate the principled approach of ASEAN through the 5-point consensus, and I urge all countries to seek a unified strategy towards Myanmar. And I also acknowledge the determined efforts of the chair of ASEAN, Indonesia, to engage all sides of the conflict in political dialogue. And my call to the military authorities of Myanmar is clear: free all detained leaders and political prisoners, open the door towards the full restoration of democratic rule. Your Majesty, Excellencies, we must also end our assault against the planet. ASEAN ranks amongst the most biodiversity-rich regions and is highly vulnerable to natural disasters. We can still limit the worst impacts and meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. I've put forward the Climate Solidarity Pact, in which all big emitters make extra efforts to cut emissions and wealthier countries support emerging economies to do so. And I have proposed an acceleration agenda that calls on developed countries to reach net zero as close as possible to 2040 and the emerging economies as close as possible to 2050. ASEAN is uniquely positioned to be a leader of an energy transition that is global, sustainable, just, inclusive, and equitable. I commend ASEAN member states that are pioneering just energy transition partnerships like Indonesia and Vietnam. And I commend all who are accelerating the phase-out of coal and jump-starting a fair and inclusive renewables revolution. But greater ambition is still needed, along with much greater support. Developed countries must finally deliver on their commitments to developing countries. Your Majesty, Excellencies, resources are also central in the third area for action, rescuing the Sustainable Development Goals. I've called for deep and structural changes to make global frameworks, including the Bretton Woods system, more representative of today's economic and political realities, and also more responsive to the needs of developing countries. Such change will not happen overnight, and I have proposed concrete steps we can take now, including a Sustainable Development Goals stimulus of $500 billion a year to the benefit of developing countries for them to be able to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. These and other action would catalyze SDG progress and help developing countries invest in key transitions across energy, food, digital education, health, decent jobs, and social protection. Your Majesty, Excellencies, I count on ASEAN member states to help raise global ambition in the vital months ahead. And you can always count on my wholehearted support to shape a future of peace and prosperity for the people of Southeast Asia and the world. Thank you.
Terima kasih Yang Mulia.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Before we move on to the plenary session, which will be done in a closed session, I respectfully request the media to leave the meeting room. Thank you.